On the channel strip, we can insert dynamics processors like gates and compressors. This typically comes right after the preamp section of the channel strip, but like I've mentioned before, it can be changed in some digital consoles. Now, we often use inserts in other parts of the signal chain, like inserting an EQ or compressor on an output, but in this video we're looking at using gates and compressors in the channel strip and listening to a couple of examples. First, we look at inserts and see where they typically come in the signal chain. Then we see how gates reduce signal below a threshold, and we see how compressors reduce the signal above a threshold. Plus, we listen to some examples so you can hear what these actually sound like. Looking at the channel strip, the insert comes at the end of the preamp section. This means that all of those settings like gain, high-pass filter, and pad are all pre-insert. And it's best to do these in order, so set your gain and high-pass filter first, and just be aware of how each of the settings affects the next part of the signal chain. But the insert comes before the rest of the channel strip, which includes the EQ and fader, and both aux pre and aux post, which we discuss in the next video. So we mostly use the insert here for two powerful audio tools, gates and compressors. These are types of dynamics processors, which means they affect the dynamics of a signal. Dynamics are simply the difference between the loud and soft parts of the sound, so both gates and compressors operate depending on how loud the signal is at any time. With gates, when the signal is below a threshold, it is cut or reduced in volume. And when the signal gets loud enough, it crosses the threshold, which opens the gate and lets the signal fully pass. We can also control how quickly the gate opens and closes with attack, hold, and release settings, and by adjusting any of these settings, we can dramatically alter how the gate sounds. In live sound, we most often use gates with drums or other percussive instruments. Drum mics will pick up a ton of unnecessary noise, especially with other loud instruments on stage. So with gates, you'll have a tighter, punchier sound that won't have ambient noise bleeding through the mics. As an example, let's listen to a rack tom, which can commonly need a gate. If we listen to it with no processing, it sounds like this. But with a gate, we can tighten up the sound quite a bit. I'll start with a low threshold, then bring it up so you can hear what it's doing. So how you do these settings really depends on the actual drums you're mixing and how well they're tuned and how well they're played, really how good they sound coming from stage. But it also depends on the style of music. Like when I'm touring with rock or pop bands, I sometimes use really extreme gating, but I definitely would not ever do that for a jazz or a soul drummer. And making decisions like this is the creative part of mixing that can be really fun. Now, just like gates, compressors have a threshold setting, but they reduce the signal when it goes above the threshold, providing a kind of automatic level control. And since the loudest parts of the signal are being reduced, once the peaks are under control, we can then turn up the overall signal, which can really help an instrument stand out in a mix. Compressors also have a ratio setting, which determines how drastically the compressor kicks in. For example, a 2-to-1 ratio will give a pretty moderate amount of compression, and a 4-to-1 ratio will give you double. The higher the ratio, the more the compression. As a general rule of thumb, 3-to-1 for instruments and 2-to-1 for vocals is a great place to start. So let's hear some more drums as an example, first by hearing how compression affects a snare drum. I'll start with the threshold all the way up, and then bring it down so you can hear what it's doing. And you can see as I'm bringing it down, the line will curve down on the screen. Let's also hear compression with some singing, the human voice with the same piece of music. And notice once I compress the signal, I'm going to add some gain back in at the end of the compressor, which we call makeup gain.
But you know that they'll say Southtown girls won't blow you away. But you know that they'll say Southtown girls won't blow you away. But you know that they'll say Southtown girls won't blow you away. But you know that they'll say.
So notice that I did boost the whole signal back up, but all of the ambient stage noise that mic was picking up was also boosted. So this is one of the reasons we want to be careful to not compress too much. We don't want to take off more than about 6 dB of gain, what we call gain reduction in the compressor. So if we stay about 6 dB or less, we should be in good shape. Then we won't have to boost all the ambient stage noise back up when we push that signal in the mix. In this video, we looked at where the insert is in the signal chain and some examples of gates and compressors.